people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this World Boxing News. DAZN has delivered 10 out of 12 pay-per-views in 2026, but not all of them feel like pay-per-views. 6 months after World Boxing News questioned whether DAZN could realistically find 12 pay-per-view events in a single calendar year, the streaming giant has already managed to deliver 10 of them. When DAZN launched its Ultimate Tier package, the promise immediately stood out. Subscribers paying more than $500 per year were told they would receive a minimum of 12 premium events. At the time, the target looked ambitious, if not outright unrealistic. Even during boxing's golden pay-per-view years, HBO rarely managed to stage more than 6 to 8 genuine blockbuster attractions annually. It's what I've been telling you. In previous eras of boxing, where the landscape was more fertile, they never did this many pay-per-views. And we're just talking about DAZN here. This doesn't even count whatever they're doing on Amazon Prime. Fast forward to June, and DAZN is only 2 events away from delivering on its biggest promise. The platform now has 10 events either staged or scheduled under the Ultimate umbrella. 10 down, 2 to go. The list includes Teofimo Lopez vs. Shakur Stevenson, Garcia vs. Barrios, Wilder vs. Chisora, Benavidez vs. Ramirez, Dubois vs. Wardley, Usyk vs. Verhoeven, Tommy Fury versus Eddie Hall. Get the fuck out of here. Xander Zayas versus Jaron Ennis, Anthony Joshua versus Christian Prenga. Talking about a fucking tune-up fight. You expect Americans to pay per view for a tune-up fight? And finally, Canelo Alvarez versus Christian Mabili. Not included on the list is the recent edition of Floyd Mayweather's exhibition with Mike Zambides in Greece. On paper, DAZN has done exactly what they promised, but whether every event feels like a pay-per-view is where the debate begins. Back in April, World Boxing News rated the first 6 events and concluded that several struggled to justify the premium label despite the platform's efforts to fill the schedule. Since then, that argument has not entirely disappeared. The basic idea is that by subscribing to the Ultimate Tier, you save money on all of the pay-per-views that you would have bought. But looking at the list, how many of these would you have actually bought? Question. Not all pay-per-views are created equal. Of the 10 events announced so far, there are undoubtedly more than a few that many fans would struggle to describe as traditional pay-per-view attractions. Fury vs. Hall, marketed as Beauty and the Beast, is arguably the biggest reach since DAZN Ultimate launched. A crossover between a reality TV personality turned boxer and the former world's strongest man may generate curiosity, but it remains a long way from the type of event that historically defined pay-per-view boxing. The $59.99 US price tag only adds fuel to the debate. Of course, you're charging Americans more than you're charging the Brits, who might actually be interested in this, and it doesn't make sense. Do you think American boxing fans give a damn about the career of Tommy Fury that you would charge them so much to see him, and not even in a real fight? A fucking freak show. This thing should come as part of your subscription. It shouldn't cost anything extra. While British viewers benefit from a far cheaper Ultimate package, American customers face a significantly higher monthly cost, despite many of the events being built primarily around UK audiences. Joshua vs. Prenga falls into a similar category. Dubois vs. Wardley also carries far more appeal in Britain than it does across the Atlantic. It's the same with those fights. I've been a fan of Anthony Joshua for a long time, but you shouldn't have to pay per view to see him tune up. That's just ridiculous. If the Fury fight does end up happening on the Netflix platform, for no additional charge at all, then how much sense does it make to the customer to pay for a tune-up fight but not have to pay for the big one.
Shouldn't have to pay for either, because they're more geared towards a British audience anyway. And what about Wardley versus Dubois? That was a fight that delivered. It was a good fight, but this is the kind of fight that you used to get as part of your DAZN subscription, nothing extra, to charge Americans extra to see it.
Not just extra, they're charging Americans more to see it than they're charging the Brits when it's the Brits that want to see those guys the most. If anything, we should be paying less than they're paying. Even Usyk versus Verhoeven, despite involving the heavyweight champion of the world, was always likely to divide opinions due to the crossover nature of the matchup. In the match, you have a Ukrainian and a kickboxer from the Netherlands. What about that makes you think that it's gonna move the needle in America?
The argument changes. DAZN may have already answered the original question. The platform has shown that 12 premium events are achievable after bringing Matchroom, Queensbury, Golden Boy, Top Rank, Boxer, Eye of the Tiger, and Salida Promotions under the same umbrella. The debate is no longer whether DAZN can find 12 pay-per-views, it's whether all 12 deserve the label.
The short answer is no.
At present, the schedule feels close to a 50-50 split between events with genuine transatlantic appeal and cards heavily weighted towards one market or the other.
Listen, I love British boxing, I really do. But enough Americans don't love it as much as I do that you should be charging us more to see it than you're charging them.
That's just fucking stupid.
I happen to think most of the pay-per-views they've done that took place in the UK should not have been pay-per-views for Americans. You want to sell it to the Brits, you do that. But for us, that should come as part of our subscription. Otherwise, it's just price gouging. You're ripping us off. Yet American subscribers continue paying substantially more than their UK counterparts. That imbalance may attract more scrutiny if DAZN reaches the promised 12. For now, some credit is due, as many doubted DAZN could find 10 pay-per-view events, never mind 12. DAZN has largely delivered on that promise. Now, whether or not all 10 deserved the label is where the real argument begins.
No, I can end it right now. A good number of those pay-per-views that they already did shouldn't have been pay-per-views, and in previous eras, they would not have been. When Anthony Joshua squared off against Vladimir Klitschko in one of the biggest fights the sport had ever seen, here in the United States, you didn't have to pay anything extra to see it. You got it as part of your Showtime or HBO subscription.
When he unified titles with Joseph Parker, when he fought Andy Ruiz 2 times, none of those were pay-per-views, and those were bigger fights comparatively than his upcoming fight with Prenga. The fight with Prenga's a fucking tune-up.
The basic idea here is, by subscribing to the tier, they save you money on all the pay-per-views you would have bought. But I wasn't going to buy Tommy Fury versus Eddie Hall, or Floyd Mayweather versus Mike Zimbides.
And that's just covering the ones I wasn't going to buy. There's a lot of others that I shouldn't have had to buy, like Usyk versus Verhoeven, Wilder versus Chisora, Wardley versus Dubois. Those are primarily geared towards a British audience, so charge them for it, not us.
And even one or some that happened right here in the United States. I don't feel that Ryan Garcia versus a proverbial punching bag in Mario Barrios should have costed anything extra. That was not a high-level boxing match.
Those are not high-level boxers, and the only reason they're ending up behind a paywall is because their demands are astronomical, not in keeping with their actual marquee value, because if it were, then you'd get big buys every time you do a show, but you don't.
Most of the time, people are not buying these pay-per-views, so if they're not going to buy them, why put them behind a paywall? And it's because of what I told you. The demands are so fucking high.
They're driving the cost of everything up.
The way you start to wonder, if you're just a regular DAZN subscriber, you didn't subscribe to the ultimate tier, you just have the regular package, what are you getting for your money?
The regular package ain't cheap, you know. That's about $225 annually.
What are you actually getting for that $225?
I don't know how many, if any, Americans actually subscribed to DAZN's ultimate tier, but if I had to guess, I don't imagine it's that many people, not when we have to pay substantially more than the Brits do. And if the goal is to make boxing a mainstream sport again and attract new eyes to it, you've got to tear down some of these paywalls. You can't grow the sport behind them.
I'm not proposing that they make everything free and just give it all away. I'm not a cheapskate. I understand that sometimes, some fights, it's warranted to charge extra.
You can't keep doing this shit all the time. Just because so-and-so believes he should get X amount of dollars for a fight, go sit on a fucking bench then.
To get the fuck out of here.
Fuck you.
Fuck this, because this is too much. I'm about as die-hard a boxing fan as they come, and I can tell you, this is not value for money.
You're supposedly trying to save people money on all the pay-per-views that they would have bought when many of these fights shouldn't even be pay-per-views.
Can't save me money on something I wasn't gonna buy.
Men's lightweight news. The WBO references FBI after claims by Gervonta Davis's mandatory challenger, Floyd Schofield.
The World Boxing Organization has responded to deleted claims made by Floyd Schofield, the president, Gustavo Olivieri, urging the lightweight contender to take any evidence he possesses to law enforcement, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Schofield, who remains the mandatory challenger to Gervonta Davis under a separate WBA order, appeared to make allegations on social media before deleting the post. What exactly Schofield says remains unclear. The gripe disappeared before any had a chance to see it, but Olivieri's response left little doubt about the seriousness of whatever concerns had been raised. Hey, Champ, Olivieri began. If you have credible evidence, documentation, witness testimony, or other reliable information suggesting corruption, bribery, fraud, abuse of authority, or any other unlawful conduct involving a WBO official, I encourage you to present such information to the appropriate law enforcement authorities, including the Federal Bureau of Investigations or other agencies with jurisdiction, so that it may be properly reviewed and investigated. Olivieri also advised Schofield to seek legal counsel if he believed he had been unfairly denied opportunities. If you believe you have been unfairly denied opportunities by another sanctioning body, you may wish to consult with an attorney experienced in boxing to evaluate your situation and advise you regarding any rights or remedies that may be available to you.
The corruption absolutely exists. I think that goes without saying. I think anybody who's been paying attention knows what kind of conversations and what kind of dealings happen behind closed doors in this sport. The preferential treatment is obvious, indicative of collusion and bribery, favoritism, you name it. So it's not a question of there being corruption. There so obviously is. The question is, what can you do about it?
The exchange marks the second time in recent months that Olivieri has publicly urged a figure in boxing to contact the FBI if evidence exists to support allegations involving the sport's governing bodies. It also reflects a trend becoming increasingly common across boxing's social media world.
Why would Gustavo tell him to do that?
Because Gustavo knows that the WBO as an organization don't have anything to worry about, but the WBA, they might. And what they're doing to the sport of boxing, what they're doing to the fighters,
It's out of control.
Rather than private discussions, formal complaints, or legal channels, grievances are often aired publicly before being clarified later, if they are clarified at all. The timing is notable as Schofield remains at the center of the ongoing WBA situation involving Gervonta Davis, with the deadline continuing to tick down and Davis running short of realistic comeback options. The unbeaten contender has repeatedly kept the pressure on through social media. Schofield quickly backtracked, though. The response his words generated soon overshadowed the gripe itself,
as that would represent a very serious course of action against the sanctioning body in the sport. Going to the feds. Why would you have to go to them?
Can't be for anything legal.
I think that after the scare that the World Boxing Council suffered years ago at the hands of Graziano Rocchigliani, who took them to court and almost bankrupted them.
For those not familiar with the story, he became WBC champion after Roy left the division. Then Roy decided to come back, at which point they took the title from Graziano to give it back to Roy, which was not legal, and Graziano was able to prove it. As a result, he had to be paid damages by the WBC.
And I think since then, the World Boxing Council has done their part to augment their bylaws to prevent that from happening again. But not just them, the WBA as well, because the WBA some years later did the same thing to Alberto Machado.
Remember, the WBA is the WBC's sister organization. Mauricio and Gilberto were tight.
And what the WBC did to Graziano Rochigliani, that almost bankrupted them. That's what the WBA did to Alberto Machado some years later. Alberto Machado becomes full WBA champion, only so that 9 months later, he can be demoted to regular champion, and Gervonta Davis can be made super.
To fight Jesus Cuellar, who was coming off a loss at featherweight, moving up to super featherweight for what was a manufactured title, a title the WBA pulled out of thin air.
And Alberto Machado complained about it for months to no avail because he didn't have the profile of a Gervonta Davis or the money behind him to formulate a legal team that would have went after the WBA, who empower themselves to do whatever they want.
That's the way it is now.
You go the WBC route, you go the WBA route, you pay your sanctioning fees, and you climb the ranks, and you follow all the rules, and in the end, you're still subject to whatever they feel like, whatever they want to do. So posts like Schofield's are becoming commonplace, and sanctioning bodies increasingly find themselves answering criticism, accusations, and frustration in the public. Every ranking, exemption, mandatory position, and championship ruling is now dissected within minutes, even underneath Olivieri's post. Users immediately challenged several recent WBO decisions, including allowing Yanni Bekalam-Kanulai to retain his title despite a lengthy absence and installing Keyshawn Davis as the mandatory for Devin Haney, despite Keyshawn Davis never campaigning at welterweight or fighting for a title at 140. Whether Schofield's concerns were justified may never be known. But when boxers make their concerns public alongside the fans, it makes sanctioning bodies' jobs that much more difficult.
Gilberto Mendoza, the president of the WBA, doesn't have the affinity for the camera that Mauricio does, so it's not as easy to come by this guy and ask him the hard questions.
Even though many of his decisions the last few years have been dubious and subject to criticism, he's a hard man to get to, and it just seems like the WBA is going to WBA.
You know what that means.
They're gonna do what they're gonna do, irrespective of what the fans and the fighters think, irrespective of who they shortchange. They don't care because there's not a lot people can do about it. They have so empowered themselves via their own bylaws that they write themselves
Who the fuck is gonna police them?
to do whatever the fuck they want. So the real question is, if this is known, why are fighters still even going the WBA route? Why pay them sanctioning fees and fight in the eliminators? Why do any of it if in the end, it all boils down to what they want, not what you did?
Whether you deserved it, whether you earned it, they don't give a fuck.
This is all about Floyd Schofield either being elevated to full WBA champion at lightweight or forcing a fight with Gervonta Davis when Gervonta shouldn't even have the title. He hasn't boxed in over a year. Unless I'm mistaken, the WBA already made him a champion in recess at the beginning of this one.
Floyd shouldn't have to go through him. He shouldn't have to deal with any of this.
The reason he is because the WBA would prefer to keep Gervonta Davis as champion so that when he comes back, they can make money off of his money.
It's funny that I think the WBA cares more about Gervonta staying champion than Gervonta himself. At this point, I don't even think he cares about keeping that belt.
They's the ones that want him to, and that's what the nature of the problem is.